Why don't we bring out the rest of the people working in the film with us? Karen, you want to bring them?
Yeah. Okay, so everybody's just going to come out, but I'm going to talk to you about it. So this is a co-production of Black Bernstein Productions and Arts Plus Labor. And representing Arts Plus Labor, we have Dawn Johnson, and we have Alan Berg and Kristen Johansson-Berg. This is going to be a big. And then we also have Picture Box, David Layton, our wonderful cinematographer. Let's give a huge hand for how beautiful this is. Mike Nicholson, who did all the motion picture animation and graphics, fantastic job. Executive producers Abe Zimmerman, Alan Berg, we've mentioned again, Anna Kiko Myers, who couldn't be here tonight, and Amy and John McCall, oh my God. And of course, yeah, and who else do we have? Why am I spacing out? Great, Nevi, where's Nevi? Where is Nevi? Nevi Owens? Oh, what are you doing? The great Nevi Owens. I will never start a project without her ever again in my life. She is tied to me. Don't steal her from me. And who else am I missing? Why am I blanking out? Graham Reynolds. Graham Reynolds. There he is. Dawn. I said Dawn Johnson. Most important person in the room. Suzanne Mason. Where is Suzanne Mason? I'm sorry to be such a space cadet, but anyway. Yeah, I know. It's really terrible.
This is real professional, isn't it? We're real artists.
For you.
If you take nothing away from this movie, if you've not seen Me and Orson Welles, you should get up now and go home and watch it, because it's a masterpiece and it's one of Rick's great movies, and too many people have not seen it. And if nothing else, I'm happy we did this movie. I'm really moved by your response, but the proof is in Rick's movies. And Me and Orson Welles is just so great.
So Louis and Karen, so talk about thank you. I mean, the film is, as I said before, extraordinary. But so what made you decide to make it, and why now, and how did the collaboration between you come about?
Well, I moved to Austin in 2000, and shortly thereafter met Louis Black. He was one of the first people I met, and Paul Steckler, who I think is here somewhere in the crowd tonight. And then I very quickly met Richard Linklater, because they very nicely introduced me to the Austin Film Society. And I'd been making arts and culture biography documentaries in New York for years and years and years at PBS American Masters series. And I'd always thought, okay, who would be the person in Austin that could be the most emblematic of the scene here, which I found fascinating. I was completely fascinated by the permeation of arts within Austin on such a large scale for such a, at that time, pretty small city. And so I immediately thought of Richard Linklater, and I immediately thought of Louis and how to make a film, and pitched it around as most producers do, and got medium, not so great response for a long time. And then Boyhood came out, and of course everybody knew who Richard Linklater was and wanted a film about him, and that was the game changer. And I came to Louis, and he said, I guess so. So we took it from there, and it was perfect timing, because Everybody Wants Some was just starting to be filmed, and David and I spent the better part of 4 months or something on the set, following it around, which was a wonderful experience, and that created the groundwork.
Well, it's such a big topic. It's a career. It's a lot of years of work, but to me, it's the tone of the film that so has its own resonance to Boyhood, and there's this sort of the respecting Rick's quietness and thoughtfulness. The film is so in the tenor of who he is, rather than. So the creative process of how you hit that so well, if there's any way to articulate that.
For me, it was a real experience. I mean, obviously, I've been watching films my whole life. I've been writing about films much of my life. I've been producing films for a decade. I started this little event. So I've been very involved with film, but I had never really directed, and it's a totally different experience because it's a completely collaborative effort. And in this particular case, there was an enormous amount of discussion on what you're talking about. What is the tone? What is this movie about? What is the tone of this movie? And it was really, what you're saying, I mean, it would take a real long time to answer because it was so consciously constructed. But it was people come come up to me and they'll say things like, well, this looks like it's almost structured like Boyhood. Well, that was part of the discussion. And we played around with the structure forever and tried different structures. The way David shot it really matches in tone the way Rick's movies work. This was a constant learning experience. Nevi, of course, as the editor, was amazing, and Dawn and everybody. But every time I watch it, I find more stuff that Graham Reynolds, the music makes it work. It brings up this or it brings up that. And to me, the biggest surprise of the whole film was Suzanne Mason, who is the researcher, because I think the strength of this movie is that footage from Slacker and from Dazed and from Before Sunrise. That the fact that you managed to track it all down, really, you begin to realize it is an army. It is a team. I mean, my whole life in Austin especially has been people come up to me, Joe Dishner and Nick Barbaro came and said, well, we're thinking we're going to start a paper. And I said, sure. And Louis Myers and Roland Swenson came to me and Nick and said, why don't we start a regional music convention? I said, sure. And when Karen said, let's do a movie, and I said, sure. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people do a lot of work, because I don't. And, but in this movie, to watch the passion and the commitment of everybody involved was just extraordinary. Rick, after I did a 3-hour interview with Rick. I did several interviews with Rick. The first one was 3 hours, and I was drenched at the end. I was exhausted in a way I've rarely been, because it mattered so much to me. And during the course of that conversation, he said, after Slacker came out and before it showed at the Dolby, Louis interviewed me for cable television. I have no memory of this at all. And Suzanne went and found that footage that we use in there. And that's kind of how it gets constructed. It's a team. We had Abe and we had Alan and we had the McCalls and Ann? The executive producers, were doing so much work in terms of revenue and budgeting. Everybody kind of came together to make it happen.
Thank you. We actually have mics here. If anybody would like to ask a question, we have a couple more minutes. You can jump up and ask a question here, or we can. So we can keep talking amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Too.
I just have another couple of shout outs. I'm sorry, so I forgot my thank you list, but. And I don't know if she's here, but I just want to say, way before I even approached anybody at American Masters, I spoke to 2 people who I hope are in this room. Kirsten McMurray, if she's here, who is the assistant to Richard Linklater, and I spoke to Sandra Dare, who's a longtime friend of mine here in Austin. Is she here, Sandra? Yay! And I said, I know Rick, but not terribly well. Am I barking up the wrong tree, or do you think that he'll agree to a movie? And you said yes, and you've been this not-so-silent supporter of this film from the very beginning, so I thank you.
People always come up and say, how did you get Rick to agree to do it? And we're actually still waiting for him to say yes. What we did was, because I know Rick really well, was we actually never really asked him, because if you ask him, he often won't answer the question. So we constructed questions that he could have said no to and didn't. So like Karen said, well, can we shoot on the set of the new film? And he said, sure, okay. And then we said, can we do some interviews with you? And he said, okay. So we never really said, we're going to do this documentary about you. Do you agree? And and hanging over our heads for the longest time, he hadn't signed the agreement to use his name. And so, oddly enough, people who put a lot of money into movies begin to panic when you don't have permission. And I knew he was going to say yes sooner or later. And Sloss knew. Sloss would do imitations of Rick going, oh, I don't know. Well, okay. And so, but it was it really was a process of a whole community of people who really enjoy each other and really respect each other's work. And so, and getting to work with Karen was just such a privilege.
Somebody let's have a question, please. We're just boring ourselves.
Why didn't you include suburbia?
Louis?
That's Michael Barker. Who would ask that question? Because it's a weaker effort, actually. And, seriously, there's all this insane footage to use. And where Suburbia is a triumph of mise-en-scène over narrative, because the play by Eric Bogosian I don't think is that strong, but I think the film has incredible moments, and I think the cast is great. You have to kill some things.
Yeah.
Obviously, Austin's changed quite a bit since the days of Slacker. You recognize some of the scenes and the locales and whatnot. They've changed a lot. I was wondering if you could comment on the film scene and the community, how it's changed. with the city?
Well, the film scene used to mostly be either going to movies or making a movie and then going to LA because there was no film scene. And so it stopped in '91 when Rick decided to stay here and stay committed to the Austin Film Society. And Toby made Chainsaw, Eagle made Whole Shooting Match and Last Night at the Alamo, but nobody really stayed. And when Rick stayed and stayed involved with the film set and stayed involved with programming, and then in '96 I got an extraordinary, 96 or 7, I got an extraordinary phone call from Rick saying, you know, federal and state funds for the arts have disappeared. Let's create a Texas Filmmakers Production Fund. And this wasn't like well-meaning people calling Rick up and saying, will you lend your name and your prestige? It was Rick calling us up and saying, let's get together and figure out how to raise money. And it's, I think, $1.5 million since then that we've raised and distributed to film and video makers. And that's money. When Paul Steckler came to town, and he had been here a little while, and Paul and I were talking, he looked at me and he goes, do you realize how extraordinary it is that filmmakers made an effort to raise money to give to other filmmakers?
Hello. So obviously, yeah, I'm just a little tall. Oh, I can? Okay, cool. You know what, I'm gonna do that then. Even this isn't tall for me. So obviously you are friends with Rick, very good friends. How do you think that influenced this documentary? Do you think it would have been different if you were just a fan of him rather than being friends, or it changed?
Yeah, I think it was a heftier. It's interesting. I'd love to get Nevi's thoughts on this too. But it's interesting because I've known him since 2001, and I don't know him that well, I would say. But Lewis has known him for 3 decades, and so there's a certain amount of increased panic on his part. You would say, I've known this man for 3 decades, But I've done this for so long that I kind of feel like I know Rick well enough to know that he'll respect good art. He'll respect a good interpretation. And I think that's one of the most special things about Rick, is that he may not agree with it all, but he'll respect it. And Nevi, what did you? Oh.
Got one of these. I think there was some trepidation at first on where we could go and where we didn't want to go, because there was a 30-plus relationship, but I think the movie really started to take form once we had that sit down with Lewis and Rick going through the archive. I think that really just opened up this box for us, literally. And it was conversational, and I think that was able to take us places that no one else could. So I think that was the turning point for us.
When we showed it, when Rick finally saw it, and his comment was, well, it wasn't too embarrassing. Which I thought, what?
3-sentence email. What a 2 in there.
So, and we thought it was Rick's. There's a long piece with me and talking to Ethan and Rick in the Chronicle, and I don't exactly remember how it ends, but the last line something is, in order for Rick to really like this movie, Rick would have not have been in it. And that's kind of hard to do. So, Rick was sweet and cooperative, and I think, to be real honest, Rick and I met in 1985 at Liberty Lunch, where he came up to me. I'd just written an obit on Sam Peckinpah, one of my all-time favorite directors. And we started talking about movies, and that conversation's ongoing. It'll be picked up tomorrow or the next day or whenever I see Rick again. And I think, really honestly, I think he really enjoyed talking about his movies with me in a kind of abstract, not personalized context, where we've talked about the history of hundreds of directors, and I think he was really engaged in thinking about his films that way, and I certainly was, and so it was a real privilege.
I would love to go on for hours, although we have to wrap this, but a couple of things. I think there's some people in this audience that are in the movie that maybe we want to do a little bit of a shout out to.
Elar, come stand up, please.
Is that it? We also have I don't know if there were any others or not, but Lewis is John Pearson here? I gotta say, John Pearson, who starts and ends the film, is my husband, and I actually still get a rush when I hear his voice. I have to say that.
One of and Michael Barker's here. Michael. Yeah. And is John here? John Sloss.
Sloss had to leave. He had to run out.
Who?
Clark. Yay!
Clark Walker, who's great. Yes. Oh.
Yeah.
I just have to say, Clark Walker, David and I interviewed him on one of the weirdest, rainiest, it was like this odd, temperature depression days, and there were these booms of thunder in the background, and you gave this interview that was almost flawless. I mean, it was wonderful, it's just really, so I'm a huge fan of Clark Walker.
Well, a couple things. So the film is playing several more times during the festival. And Louis is actually on a panel. For those of you who have badges, film badges, Louis is doing a panel with his old pal Leonard Maltin on Monday at 12:30 in room 16AB, I think. It's in the convention center.
And then also Monday at Hallie.
16, yeah.
Monday at 12:30 at the Ritz. No, what? Monday at 6:30 at the Alamo.
There's an app. Everybody by now should have the South by Southwest Go app and to check out this stuff. But I want to thank you guys all for being here.
I want
Louis,
to
go
just
ahead.
plug, and then so 6:30 on Monday at the Alamo Ritz. Rick and I and Mark Rance, who I think is probably here, and Jonathan Steering from IFC have restored Eagle Pinnell's 1984 masterpiece last night at the Alamo. Mark Rance has done such an extraordinarily beautiful job on this film that if you've seen it, you have to see it again. And if you haven't seen it, well, first watch me and Orson Welles, but then on Monday, be at the Ritz.
Okay. Is that everything?
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. It's an amazing film.